Hello and welcome to one of the last, possibly the penultimate webinar for this school year. In the fall, you should know if you're in an enrolled school, and arguably if you're not, because I'm not all that good at saying no to things. If I'm doing live presentations, people can come to any of my live presentations. If you can't make it to the live presentation, now that I actually know how to do tech, I may well be able to set up a camera so that people can remotely watch live presentations that they cannot make it to. And I might, if people ask me to, continue to maybe do like a webinar a month or something like that for people who just really can't get the schedule to fit with other people's PD schedules. So there will be stuff in the fall. There will be in the next week a survey coming out because I need to collect data about use of the services in order to present that to the people who pay me to do these services. And part of that will be encouraging people to tell me what they would like me to be offering going forward, including what topics you would like me to work on writing up for new presentations in the fall. Speaking of new topics, today's is a new topic. It's because it is newly written and therefore I haven't jumped through all the hoops to ensure that it is eligible for contact hours and or PDPs. It is not officially granting those. When I'm doing all the paperwork over the summer and gathering all the details about stuff, if I discover retroactively that it did actually meet the criteria and is actually eligible, then I can, at that point, send PDPs or CEUs, but there's no guarantee up front. So you can go through the same process as you do for any of the webinars of, I'd like you to do the evaluation whether you care about certificates or not, because I like the feedback and I need the feedback. But there is a code at the end of the evaluation. If you save the code and you put it in on the material request sheet and Zoom logs your attendance, and then this summer I discovered that it was actually eligible after all, you might get a spontaneous surprise certificate that you did not expect. The key is, do not expect it. Let it be a gift. Don't ask me about it. We'll just see if that happens, okay? Because these are new topics that have not been as thorough. All the paperwork for it is basically how much do I already have ready to just throw in the paperwork versus would I have another whole pile of stuff, and or would I discover I don't have the details in the webinar that would have needed to be there to be documented. So, and today's new topic is not advancing. There we go. Race, culture, education, and mental health. You might notice I do my webinars in a dark closet because if I'm in any ambient light at all, I am like not even pink. I am like glowing albino white. And I am the first to say that it is pretty ridiculous for a middle-aged, middle-class white chick to try and do any kind of education around race or racism in the US. I know stuff. I know a lot about this topic, but the breadth and depth of my knowledge is woefully inadequate to the topic. Hopefully it's adequate to a brief webinar on the topic, because of course the topic could be, you know, like not just a webinar, not just a course, but like a whole lifetime of study. So that much makes sense. But I just want to let you know that I am the first to say that I am not the right person for this, but I'm the person you have. And so I will bring what I do have to offer. And among the things that I do have to offer is not as much understanding of the experience of the situation, but I do know brains. And so I will start with that because that's what I do for a living, is psych and brains. I also do have the experience of being a white person in a racist society, because the idea that race is something that only applies to people who aren't in the dominant group is a significant part of the problem. And so one thing I tend to do about any of the things I educate about is trying to help people understand, understand where it comes from and understand what drives it. Because even if it's something that we do not like, we don't like a lot of the mental illnesses existing, but understanding the causes and the underpinnings of them helps you move forward in making it better. And so that's the approach I take to pretty much everything. So let's start with that, okay? We have the standard disclosure because there might be contact hours in your future. I have no conflicts of interest or commercial bias to disclose because my program is funded by a grant. So if you do the evaluation, which I hope you will, you can answer that, yes, I told you that I and my program have no conflicts, and then it asks if there's any bias. Hell yeah, there's bias. The whole program's about bias, but they mean commercial bias. So like I said, I do brains, okay? And what our brains are good at, our brains are highly evolved organs that are brilliant calculators for doing some very specific things. And among the main things they do is they group things, they categorize things. It's something that we do consciously and something that we do constantly, and we love making cute little memes about it, and you can look at this phrase, one of these things is not like the other. And that song, right? Raise your hand if you've heard that song. I mean, this was a basic Sesame Street activity. You got three things that are similar and one thing that is different. And it's training your brain, tapping into that natural, urgent imperative of your brain to sort things and find out what's together, what's different. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. And that's the weird thing. It's that grouping what matches makes sense. But you notice how automatically we jump to the idea that the thing that is different doesn't belong. So where do we get that doesn't belong aspect? Where does that come from? Is that something trained into us? Well, that's something our brain is also doing very automatically, okay? Our brain needs to know what things are different because the reason why it's categorizing stuff is it still thinks that we're cavemen, hunter-gatherers, okay? So it spends a lot of energy processing what these differences are. It's, okay, if I see these two leaves, what's the same about them? What's different about them? Do I care what's different about them? Yeah, usually I do, because it might be dangerous. What in this background is different? Oh, this section's a little bit different. Oh, that's because it's a predator, these snakes, they look very similar. And yet, one of them could be a pet and the other one not so much. And so the brain wants to figure out, do I need to know this in order to stay alive? Do I need to be able to do this sorting in order to do well by us, okay? And will this be useful in the future? If you live in Massachusetts, you really want to be able to tell the difference between briar and poison ivy, because while one will poke you, the other one will just make you an itchy mess for weeks. So it spends a lot of energy to do that. And it's work. It's work that your brain does. And it's stressful work because of the danger portion. And so we are used to the idea that when you got to do work, you might be a little bit resistant to it. If it's like, oh, this is going to be a chore, which sometimes your brain is kind of like, oh, this is going to be a chore. You develop some resistance to wanting to do it. And you may notice that when we see things changing, I'm sorry, my nose is doing that itchy thing it does. When we notice change and difference increasing in our environment, you may have noticed a slight difference based on age of how that is encountered, whether it's a new technology or a new form of music or a new cuisine being sold down the street. Who rushes to go try it and who's like, oh no, not another one? Tends to be that the resistance gets stronger as people get older, which again is something that we're very quick to just get judgy about. But I always look and go, why is that? Because when you see something that broadly happening, what's going on here? Well, one thing is, if your brain is collecting all this data, it's gotten a lot more data when you're older. So it's already got a lot of categories to try and put things into. There's also the fact that change generally is stressful, and there's more change when you are older. And this is partially by how you process time. You generally perceive time in relation to how much time you have experienced. So when you are 4, a summer goes on forever because it's like 1/16 of your entire lifespan. When you're 60, it goes by in a heartbeat because it's less of a percentage. So time is subjectively, your perception of time is literally, clearly speeding up. It does not help that we also live in a world where the actual changes are coming a lot more rapidly as well. Plus, you've got a brain that is aging. So it's having a harder and harder time categorizing things, doing this work of absorbing more information. So when you see an older person who is struggling more with everything we're going to talk about today, that's not a get out of do it free card, but it is a understand why there's so much more resistance as you get into a person who is older. Okay. What your brain does to save energy though, because your brain knows this is too much work. We don't want to have to do this so much. So it starts to develop shortcuts, things that are just real quick and easy. You know, if this, then that. If this, have that reaction. Shortcuts save that time, save that energy, because if you are looking at these 2 snakes, you do not want to have to stop and remember, what's that little quote they have of black and yellow, friendly fellow, black and red kill you dead, or is it black and red? I don't know. There's a rhyme. Meanwhile, you've been bitten by the poison snake and you've died. So it's much better if you have a shortcut. For some people, the shortcut is no snakes. Anything that looks like a snake, no. A very common shortcut that developed thousands and thousands of years ago is that the people who are near me are safe. They've been vetted. They're my family, they're my clan, they're my tribe, they are safe, they are trustworthy. People who are different from me, I'm not so sure about. They are at the very least not yet classified and quite possibly dangerous. And so to reinforce this, you know, that's what your brain is automatically doing, is that new things are, not so sure about you, kind of neurologically, but then culture comes along and reinforces this. This is where we get culture, basically. Food, dress, language, religion, all of this is reinforcing the idea of stick to your own kind, stick to your own kind. Like who's familiar with the kosher laws in the Old Testament, the Jewish kosher laws? A big part of it, I was a religion major, a big part of the laws that the Hebrew people had as they went into Canaan, basically totally designed around don't assimilate, stay yourself, don't mix with the people there. This is why you've got so many food laws, because if you can't sit down and have a meal with your neighbors, you're not going to talk to them as much, and that helps keep you from assimilating. And part of the reason why you want to keep the assimilation is so that you can, if you've got limited resources, know who to share them with. You're going to prioritize your group and deprioritize everyone who's on the outside. And that's just society and evolution trying to keep your genes going into the next generation more in a world that might have a famine. Problem is, other parts of our brain work against this, because we've also got parts of our brain that are really, really eager to connect with people because we're social creatures. In fact, we got neurons called mirror neurons, which when you look at someone, the mirror neurons fire when you see someone doing something, they give you a shadow of the experience of doing that. That's where you understand how a facial expression indicates emotion. If someone smiles, your mirror neurons tell you, ooh, when your face does that, you feel like this. And thus, you know, oh, that person might be happy. If you see someone crying, oh, when your face looks like that, you feel like this. You get a little shadow of sadness, and that's where you get this sense of empathy. And so when you look at a group of hungry refugees, one part of your brain is saying, different, keep your own food. The other part of your brain is going, but I feel connected to them. I want to help them. So how does your brain solve this conflict that it's having between connection and distance? Well, part of it is some people but some people just start going to one or the other, and they really don't notice the other one. They feel very empathetic, and they don't really get the sense of difference. It's like, why would you even think that person's different? Look at them. They are so much the same as us. Other people would completely discount the empathy side and say, I feel nothing when I look at those people. I just want to focus on my own. To reinforce it, some cultures, communities, groups, because, you know, once you've got your approach to how to square these two competing urges, you kind of want to pass it on to everyone around you. So there's a lot of societal, cultural, behavioral things that are brought into bear to help squelch this feeling of compassion. Because what happens most of the time is that you got a little bit of both, and that's uncomfortable. You know, I'm really prioritizing my people, but I feel really bad whenever I look at those people. How do I make those bad feelings go away? And so there's various things that society, culture, and history give you to try and help you shut down that empathy side so that you can just focus on your own people. And it's various cultural constructs that emphasize this otherness, highlighting the differences, being very, very focused on exactly what is different about the people. And then once you can say, okay, well, those people have more melanin, their skin is darker, or those people, their eyes are shaped differently, or those people are shorter, or those people are hairier, whatever, you start to pile onto that the idea of different must be less than, because then you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to feel that bad about it. Okay, so they are different and they don't matter as much. And just in case you're not sure of that, we will go ahead and have a lot of other social constructs piling on, trying to tell you that this is objectively true. So you'll have religious approaches, and religion gets very, very fixated on our belief system is the best one. The others might also exist, but they are wrong. They're not as good as ours. And this, I have to say, is a relatively recent, you know, a couple thousand years development, because it used to be that religion was very local. Religion was, you worship the God of this area because that's the God that makes the plants grow here. If you want your crops to survive, you worship this God. If you're moving over there, you got to worship the God over there because this God does these plants. And one of the fascinating things about the Babylonian, the Jews' time in Babylon exile was that when they wrote the Old Testament, they invented the idea of the portable God. They invented the idea that you could keep worshiping the same God even though your people had been moved elsewhere. They even like made a box to carry them around in. And so that was a really new idea. And once your God isn't local, you've got to decide, okay, well, if I could have any God, why do I have this one? Well, because this one's best and that one's wrong. And then when science started to supplant religion, we started getting more, oh, well, let's come up with scientific reasons. And if you look at some of the science, the old time science, it is creepy that they'd be like having measurements of every aspect of the skull of, oh, look, the proportions on the skull are different, therefore, obviously they're inferior. And various other pseudoscientific things. And then when all else fails, blame the victim. You know, if I have more and that person has less, it's their own fault. They can, I got mine, go get your own. They could go get their own. And you see that a lot when you've got people saying that no one should be complaining at all about racism or discrimination or inequality. And they will point to selective examples of people who, despite having the racial piece, still had the economic success, and therefore say, well, everybody could have it. They all could have it. There's no such thing as discrimination. All they need to do is do what those people over there did to be successful, and they would all be successful too. So it's really just their own fault for not trying hard enough. This is the same as looking and saying, you know, that whole Holocaust thing that people are upset about, it's totally the Jews' fault. Because, you know, there are Jews that escaped. They hid, or they ran away, or they left. You know, if the other 6 million had put a little bit more effort into it, we wouldn't even have a problem. Obviously, that's ridiculous, because there was a very, very serious system in place, making it virtually impossible to escape. And the people who did escape put a lot of work into it and had a lot of luck. Same thing applies here. But even if you aren't focusing so much on distancing from the others, because a lot of people live in a very homogeneous community where they don't encounter people who are different from them that much, so they pretty much don't think about them that much. So they don't spend a lot of time thinking about them as other, and therefore how do I make them be someone that I don't care about. They will at least be focusing on themselves. And so looking just at their own homogeneous community, they'll focus a lot on how superior their group is, or how hardworking their group is, and how much they deserve to have what they have. They earned it. It's their right because of things that they can feel proud of and take credit for. And part of why there's all of this effort to not share is not just because you don't want to have to feel bad about the people who don't have as much, that's a big part of it, but also there's this belief in what's called the zero-sum game. That is the idea that whatever there is out there, there's a fixed amount. You know, there is one pool of money in the world, and if we want to have the poor people have more money, we got to take it away from the rich people, and the rich people are going to have less money. Now, when they're rich enough, we kind of don't have a problem with that, but the economics of it, the economists hasten to point out that the whole idea of economic growth is that it's not a pie, it keeps getting bigger so that everybody could have more. And when it comes to something like respect, compassion, equal rights, there ain't no pie at all. You've got as much of this as you care to have. It's not like giving more respect to that person means that I have to be disrespected, or giving more compassion to that person means that I have to accept people being cruel to me. It does not work that way. But people will buy into that a lot, and you will get specific pushback of saying, oh, but if I say something good about your group, then that means you're saying something bad about my group. You know, that's where you get things like Black Lives Matter, people responding with all lives matter, because what they hear when they hear Black Lives Matter is, oh, so you're saying that my life doesn't matter, which is not remotely what Black Lives Matter means. But that's where you get that kind of pushback, is people believing in this zero sum, the idea that there's just a limited supply that we're all fighting over, as opposed to recognizing that, you know, we could be working on making a bigger pie. So all of these combine societally to societal systems, which we call racism. And there's various examples that pretty much anyone would look at and say, yeah, that's racism. Yeah, blackface, yeah, pretty bad. KKK, yeah, lynchings, yeah, lynchings, they were a bit racist, yeah. And we want to recognize that there's more than just that. It's not just the big things. It's the constant little things as well. It's the what we call microaggressions, which is a very accurate term that is a very unfortunate term, because it makes people think, well, how bad can it be if it's a micro? Yeah, it's like small things, enough of them can kill you, in case germ theory didn't teach us that. But having constant daily struggles with reminders of this difference and this hierarchical, societal hierarchical overlay on the neurological tendency to identify differences. So that's what we're here to talk about today. All right. Now, there are many categories that get isms. You know, it's not just race. We do have a race, but you know, we'll recognize that, yeah, we've got this sorting thing down pat. We can't stop doing it. We sort everybody constantly. And whenever we sort them, we almost always end up sorting them in this hierarchical way, where we've got the winners, we've got the people that are the more honored, the more respected, the higher, the better ones. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the people who are less and disadvantaged. And this is just what our brains do all the time. And culture feeds into it and reinforces it. Except it's not binary like this. You know, we've always got, you know, gradations where, you know, you've got just not black and white, but you've got all the different shades in between that have different levels of problems. It's not just rich and poor, but also if you got two people who are fairly close to the same, the one who's got more of a job, better job, but we do tend to view the ones who don't work but are still rich, still get to be top of the heap no matter what. The Christian Jewish one, that was until Western folks discovered that there's other religions out there too, and then they started, you know, okay, well, some people hate on the Jews less because they're like pre-Jesus Christianity, whereas Muslims, they got no idea what to do with them. We've got various levels on the health thing. You know, a person who's a couch potato is not as good as a person who runs marathons, but they're both better than someone who's wheezing away, and no one even wants to think about the people who can't make it upstairs. When it comes to intelligence, we got ways to specifically quantify it. So yeah, we could say, okay, depending on exactly how many years of school you did, that tells you. And the age one keeps moving around, okay? Because it used to be just with age comes wisdom and honor. Not so much. Now it's kind of, if you're middle-aged, then that's when you're making the most money. So, and then the elderly are pretty much, the youth and elderly kind of swapped places and fell off over there. And when you look at all of these and you pull them together into a pretty star pattern, you end up with what is called intersectionality. And this is saying, look at all the different aspects that people have about them. And you can put it on a star thing like that, and any part of you that is above this black line is an area where you got it pretty good. You're in the dominant culture. And on the bottom half is where you will face discrimination, oppression, struggle, problems, okay? So that's what intersectionality means, if you ever hear that word and you're wondering, what's that about? So what that's about, though, is that it is recognizing that if you got more than one thing below that line, your life sucks even more, okay? It's that it compounds. You know, being a woman sucks in many contexts. Being Black sucks in many contexts. Being a Black woman really, really sucks in even more contexts, okay? The problem with intersectionality is that people will look at it and immediately map themselves onto it because, you know, self-interest, it's what we do, it's neurological. And we jump to say, oh yeah, I know just how you feel because look, I've got this problem too, okay? And that is an automatic reaction we have that is so extraordinarily unhelpful, okay? And so when you look at the intersectionality chart up here, you know, if you look at this and it's like, okay, I'm white, but oh, look, I'm female. So yeah, I know just how you feel. Got to recognize that that's A, inaccurate, and B, kind of rude, okay? So, and people say, no, I'm not being rude, I'm connecting, I'm being empathetic, I want to empathize, I'm trying to share the experience, and okay, you want to empathize? Find your place on the bottom half of the star, and when someone's talking to you about their issues, you know, imagine that you are telling someone that you struggle with this area of discrimination, and before you can get like 2 sentences into it, the person you're talking to immediately says, oh yes, I know exactly how you feel, and then they talk for a very long time about their experience, and then they end by saying, you know, how they've been successful anyway, despite all of these challenges, and all you need to do is just do what they did because they're brilliant, and you could be successful too if you just tried harder. Raise your hand if you've had that kind of conversation with someone about any of the areas of your life that are a struggle for you. You know, anyone out there? No one's had these conversations? Wow, you're lucky. When you have a conversation like that, realize how really annoying it is when people talk to you like that, and empathize with that annoying feeling. Okay, and recognize this so that you don't leap to the idea of, this is the chance for me to join in the conversation as a co-traveler rather than listening to what the person is saying. So for the purposes of keeping that focus, we're going to today kind of focus on just one line in our intersectionality. Okay, we're just going to look at race today. That does not mean the other ones don't exist. It means that we're just going to look at one of them today, because like I said, this is a short webinar. We do not have an entire course to go through all the different aspects of discrimination, though other ones might come up in examples periodically. So when we're looking at just these and trying not to look at the others, and I get that urge to go, yeah, but I can relate. It's because we want to feel empathetic. And we feel like what we need to do to connect with a person who struggles is to be empathetic. And all my life, I've had that same thing of, what you need to do, walk a mile in their shoes, and then you'll appreciate what they're struggling with. And it's a nice thought, but the problem is people think that it's a sufficient thought. Okay, it's not that walking a mile in someone's shoes is a useless activity. It's that people tend to think that it's a complete activity. I was listening to a podcast about people who studied and written biographies of, I forget the name of the woman, but she wrote a book in the early 60s, I want to say, called Soul Sister, where she was a white woman who really wanted white people to understand the Black experience more. So what she did was, she actually took medicine that treats vitiligo in order to darken her skin so that she could pass for Black. And she went and lived for like 6 weeks in Harlem among Black people and totally passed for Black, and then went back and wrote her book. She also, during it, would periodically go and visit friends on the Upper East Side, and people looking at that were like, okay, the Black experience generally does not include being able to just take a night off and go down to the Upper East Side and hang out in your friend's penthouse. And even before they did that, I was like, yeah, the Black experience does not last just 6 weeks. It does not come when you are an adult. It comes after you have been Black all your life. And you're going to keep being Black for the rest of your life. It's not, you know, yes, trying it on for a day is definitely eye-opening, but it's very, very limited. And we want people to recognize that, because the problem with rushing to say, yes, I know just how you feel, is, first of all, it's frequently in the form of interrupting the person who's talking and saying, yes, 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 enough about you. Let's talk about me and how much my experience is similar to yours. It's grabbing the conversation away from whoever is talking and making it not about them. And you might say, oh, well, that's not what I mean to do, except subconsciously, it's almost certainly what you mean to do, because listening to the other person's experience is really painful. Even if it's not a painful experience, the fact that it is different is doing that thing to your brain where your brain's going, this is different. What do I do with different things? It's making your brain have to work harder. Talking about familiar things is comfortable. Talking about unfamiliar things is harder work and uncomfortable. And if what they're talking about is painful, then it's even more uncomfortable. And if it is pain that you cannot begin to imagine, it's even more uncomfortable. And so the rush is to yeah, I don't want to talk about that. So let's rush in and say, oh, I know just how you feel. Let me tell you how much I can empathize with you, which is a false equivalency. You got to recognize that we got to stop even looking at the idea of equivalency. We got to stop playing misery poker with everything, okay? People are hurrying to say, oh, but I suffer too. And when anyone says, A, we weren't talking about you, and B, my pain is really, really big. Do you get how big my pain is right now? people default to the, oh, so you're saying I don't have any pain at all. It's like, no, no, no. Whatever you're trying to empathize with, your suffering is real. It is different though. So it is not the same conversation to talk about what you can compare it to. We're not saying that you don't have anything to talk about, just not in this conversation. And yeah, in this conversation, it may well be that the pain you have to share is really nothing compared to the pain that this person is trying to articulate and convey to you and help you be able to appreciate. So, but people say, isn't that very divisive though? Isn't that, you know, empathy is supposed to bring us together and make us feel, you know, together and unified instead of separate. And you know, we're trying to bridge this gap, okay? And so is it unity or is it difference? And I'm saying, well, you can have unity and still have difference in there, okay? Our default approach, the general standard mainstream society approach, is to assume that it's mainstream. Everybody's got it, right? We're all in this together, right? How many times have we said that in the last few months? And then suddenly realize that, oh, you know what? We're all in this together when I'm talking to someone who actually lost someone to COVID is kind of a trivial thing to say. So recognizing that the mainstream life that we look around at and say, you know, this is what American culture is not universal for everyone. You know, if you've got any Jewish friends, talk to them in December, and it's understandable that they might be a little bit sick of everyone wanting to wish them Merry Christmas. And them saying Happy Holidays is not saying Christmas sucks. They're just saying it's not a universal experience. Thank you. I loved on Buffy, at one point, Buffy turns to Willow and says, so what are you doing for Christmas? And Willow says, same as I do every year, being Jewish. So getting that the universal experience is not universal. So people say, okay, well, let's focus on what we have in common then. Let's look at what we actually have in common. The problem is common ground is sometimes really kind of a very small little wedge in there that we don't necessarily have that much that we actually really share. So we'll say, well, let's look at the minority culture. Let's shine a spotlight on it and let's, you know, go and kind of like a tourist, go and take a vacation looking at it. But it ends up being kind of lopsided because it kind of gives the impression that it's something to visit. It's not a whole experience. You know, a lot of people totally don't think about Black history other than the month of February. And there's kind of this feeling that, yes, Black history is very, very important, especially in February. Rather than, no, it's always been there. It's still there, not during February. It's kind of lopsided to look at it as this very other thing. What we want to try and do is actually have more of an integrated experience where we are looking at all of it all the time. You know, recognizing that I've got my experience and you've got your experience and we've got our experience, and all of it is part of the experiences that are worth talking about. Okay, we want to be honestly spending some time throughout the entire combination of it. And part of that is recognizing that when we talk about what the unique aspect of the dominant experience is not, I mean, talking about the unique, okay, general mainstream American culture that everybody shares is there. Okay, one minority culture is over here. What is unique to the dominant culture that the minority culture does not actually have the experience of is the thing that lots of people in the majority really don't want to talk about, called, oops, I skipped, my slides are out of order. Let's go back to the minority experience of how to do it, not just during February, okay? Appreciating the minority experience is actually listening to what the whole experience is, not just looking at the suffering side of it, you know? Yeah, there's definitely suffering, definitely. There's also stuff that is wonderful, and there's stuff that's kind of neutral, and there's stuff that's everything, okay? And listening to that experience means actually just hanging out and listening to that experience, not rushing to compare it, not rushing in to say, okay, and then this is what I have. And I mean, not just verbally, but like mentally as well. Don't just sit there. I mean, it's something that takes a lot of mental exercise to practice watching something. And part of you will be going, okay, this is very different from what my experience is, because my experience is this other thing. But it's also good if you can find some time to just be present in what you're listening to without mentally or verbally rushing in to say, oh yeah, let me tell you what I've got that's similar, okay? Very often, I mean, this comes from, we're used to, you talk, I talk, you talk, I talk. It's, you know, like ping pong, it's called a conversation. It's a natural urge. And part of it is recognizing that the dominant experience is dominant enough that you're probably not sharing a whole bunch that the other person hasn't already heard about. Whereas they might be sharing stuff that you never even realized was there. You know, because we've got big gaping holes of stuff that we just don't know. Like, I'm very chagrined to admit that having this presentation on Juneteenth, total accident. Is about it being on a Friday towards the end of when I'm wrapping things up. I did know about Juneteenth before Trump. Okay, he did not make it famous for me. But I honestly had never heard of it until 5-10 years ago, which is stunning when you think about it. That's just bizarre that something that important could be something that just never was even worth mentioning all the years I was growing up. And so all of my holidays, most people have heard of, okay? So recognizing that the dominant side has already had their turn. And we want to emphasize that just because we're saying, yeah, we don't want to hear about the dominant right now, we're not saying that there's nothing going on in the dominant experience. We're just saying that we're talking about this right now. Stop trying to change the subject. Now, the other thing that happens is when you listen to a minority experience, especially a negative one, people rush to be defensive. Okay, rush to, you hear a horrible story of a white person treating a black, like, did anyone see that video about the white dude in Florida yelling at the black teen girls like yesterday? There's like a new one every day, so that's today's video. And there's an immediate, either out loud or to yourself, urge to rush in and say, oh, but I'm different, I would never do that. And hopefully you are, hopefully you never would. But again, remember, the conversation isn't about what you would do. The conversation is about the other person's experience right now. And if you are verbally interrupting to emphasize that, that is itself kind of rude and is itself kind of inflicting similar pain, not as much perhaps, but still. It's also, the more defensive you feel, a close cousin to defensiveness is saying that it's their own fault. You know, very close to the, I can't be blamed for this. Well, who can be blamed for this? Well, the person who got hurt. And that happens a lot in many different contexts. You know, that's where lateral violence comes from. That's where, you know, not speaking up when you see a peer being treated very badly by the boss, because that's risky. And so it's easier for your brain to decide, well, maybe the peer really is bad at their job, and that's why they're being harshed on, rather than saying, hey, that is, you know, unacceptable behavior that the boss is doing. So recognizing that. When we look at the unique dominant experience, this is the segue I was almost making, we have to recognize that the really unique aspect of being in the dominant on any of those hierarchies is privilege. And privilege is one of those words that ends fighting words. People get really, really pissed and say, oh, how dare you say I have privilege? I don't have privilege. Yes, we do. We all have privilege depending on the context. For some people, we've got lots of contexts that offer us lots of opportunities to have privilege, and some people have less. And it does change a little bit over time, okay? All privilege is that it's an aspect of your life that goes well for you, that's easier for you, okay, that you have a benefit from. And insisting that there's no privilege whatsoever is saying that there's no benefit, or saying that everybody has the same amount, or everybody has the same thing. Like, I am privileged to live in a country that does not have a famine. I do not have to be a subsistence farmer. that is a privilege. That is very, very good. I can acknowledge that. That does, saying no, I don't would be somehow saying that the people in a famine area who are starving aren't starving. I mean, that's just denying basic reality. Now, what I have for privilege might be extra. It might be that, yeah, and I've got all these electronic toys too. I really don't need them, but I got them. I might as well enjoy them. Or it might be kind of, yeah, everyone ought to have that. Everyone ought to be able to not be hungry when they go to bed at night. Everyone ought to be able to walk down the street without worrying that someone's going to run out and attack them. You know, basic human rights. The fact that not everybody has them means that those who have them are privileged, okay? Now, other aspects of privilege are, you didn't earn it. You don't get any credit for it. It's just a gift, okay? And think about when you're talking to your kids, you're like, okay, it's a privilege that you have that phone. It's not a right, so I can take it or I can give it, you know, that it's nothing that they, if the kid earned the phone, you'd have a harder time taking it away, right? Because they earned it, it's theirs. Privilege, you didn't really earn it. It's just there. Which means you don't necessarily have to feel guilty about it because you didn't do anything to grab it. It's just there. But when people insist that, no, any privilege I have, I earned it. I worked very hard to get where I am in life. It's like, yes, you may well have worked very hard to get where you are. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't built on privilege that put you within reach of being able to get there. Because if you say anyone could do it, then you're really just saying anyone who doesn't do it, just they didn't try hard enough. All they need to do is try hard enough. Again, yes, the people who fled the Nazis worked very, very hard. But if they did not have access to a support system or someone who would hide them in their basement or something, no amount of hard work would make up for lack of having that lucky access to something that made it possible. Which is another thing, privilege very often comes from someone or something outside yourself, often coming from some outside source. And that's one to really recognize that privilege frequently is in the form of people around you treating you a certain way. You know, when I go to a store, the way the employees of the store treat me demonstrates privilege based on what I look like. The way they treat someone else might demonstrate lack of privilege for that person. It's nothing I'm doing, it's nothing that person's doing, it's what the staff are doing. So it's something that you very often don't really have much control over. So what do you do about it? Well, lots of people think that the answer is, oh, so you should feel really bad. You should feel guilty. But no, you should not necessarily feel, I mean, you didn't do anything to get it. You didn't do anything to cause it. It's something that is either just existing around you or that other people are doing. So step away from the whole feel bad, feel bad, feel bad thing. And instead look and say, okay, what is it? If it is, I've got kind of wealth, I've got extra that other people don't have, I might consider sharing it a little. I might consider donating. I might consider, you know, spending more of my time. If I am privileged enough to be able to make a living not working 80 hours a week, maybe I should spend some of my extra time helping out the people who do have to work so much. Something like that. If my privilege is a basic human right, I should acknowledge that, recognize that, and recognize that if someone doesn't have it, that's messed up. There's a reason why they are not as successful, and I should be bothered by that. You know, if I go into a store and someone treats me nicely and treats a person of color badly, I don't feel guilty, but if I don't speak up and say, hello, what are you doing? That person deserves to be treated respectfully as well. Then maybe I should feel guilty about that. Not about the privilege in the first place, but about whether I'm doing anything to address the barriers that shouldn't be there. But most of all, just acknowledging that it's there. Stepping off this, no, there's no such thing, there's no such thing. You know, stop taking complete universal credit for everything, for where you are in life. Definitely take credit for the things you did. Absolutely. Not saying no credit given. I'm just saying recognize that there are aspects of privilege that made it more possible, made it easier. And you might say, but it wasn't easy. And I'm like, yeah, not saying easy, saying easier, saying less hard, less impossible than other people. Which means if someone else isn't where you are, recognize that not having the privileges you had made it more impossible for them, possibly, into the full-on impossible realm. And we could stop blaming them. There are a couple of really good metaphors, and I don't know if I put the link there. The link is definitely at the end. I meant to click the link there. I'm not sure why that link isn't there. Anyhow, it's a brilliant, brilliant link on YouTube. I've got it at the end in the links, where, and you see this a lot, where they'll have stand here and take a step forward or back based on various things about your life that make you privileged. And the video that I'm linking to is a group of high school students. And it's, you're gonna run a foot race and y'all start there, and it's take 2 steps forward if. And then he just starts naming various things about, having your parents together, or having a tutor, or having, all those things. Another perhaps more fun way to look at inequality is a card game called Scum. Anyone like to play cards? Raise your hand if you like to play cards. I'm not gonna spend much, if you want, I'll explain this afterwards, but I stuck this in here so you can know. It is a really cool card game, and it's a great one to teach kids as well. It's basically a card game where the cards are stacked in favor of half the players and against the other half, and then you play. And unsurprisingly, the people who had the cards stacked in their favor almost always stay on the top. Every so often, someone who's on the bottom gets up there, and when they do, they say, well, I got really lucky with my cards. There's no way to play this game and say, well, it's because I'm so good at it. So it's a really cool card game. I'll talk about it at the end if anyone's curious about it. Okay. Now, there are shared experiences, both cultural, but also on the psychological racial tension side of things. A very big shared experience that we have is implicit bias, which is something that some people people have been studying it for a while, and they put out things about it, and then it became sort of a socio-political cultural flashpoint, and people would argue about it and say they don't believe it or they do believe in it. It's a neurological thing, okay? You can't just disbelieve in neurology. Sorry. Our brains are hardwired. They are designed to find shortcuts. Remember that. Basically, neurologically, stereotypes are a great time saver. So that's what our brain wants to do. And as we experience things, our brain uses all those experiences to construct this database to categorize things. Okay, what things signal that this person is rich, this person is someone I should ask directions from, this person is someone I can expect what of, okay? And the point is, your brain wants to have a really rapid automatic response to whatever the information is, so that you don't even notice what your inclination is leaning you towards. So there's a test for it, but I thought I would throw in some slides that aren't in your packet for you to do kind of a little temporary version on it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a bunch of slides, and in each slide, right up in the middle is going to be a category, a noun generally. And there's going to be 4, or if I can find them, 5 pictures. And I want you to just mentally, or poke your computer, you can, pick the one that fits that category the best. And the goal is to pick it as quickly as you can. Okay, so as we go through, look at your computers and do this. So as you look at these, you know, you start off with things that you can be like, okay, yeah, I totally get the neurological imperative to figure out what things I can eat safely. So technically, you can eat nasturtium. Okay. Anyone pick the snake for a pet? In case you're wondering, this is the safe kind. This is the kind that can be a pet. If you pick the doggy, that's a wolf. You're going to die. Sorry about that. And that was supposed to actually be another animal. Sorry. You know, with chair, it's, do you go by the fact that someone's sitting or the fact that it's got legs? Then you start getting into, okay, what do I immediately latch onto first for doctor? Okay. Is it the stethoscope? Is it the lab coat? Is it the age? You know, anyone get tripped up by this one? What do you think about with this one? I think lots of people go straight to her unless they saw what's in the background and thought, wow, that's some serious kindergarten work out there. Very few people, I think, would grab, you know, the angry looking old white guy. But even though this one's with a little kid, the dress and gender would probably steer you away from that one. You know, this is if you're really tied into clothes. That's actually a sexy Catholic schoolgirls costume ad. No? And then when you start going, okay, we got nothing here to give you a clue. No one's holding an instrument. Who do you think of for musician? Okay, who do you think of for dancer? Same kids. Did you switch? Why? What made one kid seem musical and another kid seem dancerly? I always like this one. If you know them, anyone know who these? They're all gay, so there are no wrong answers. But it's interesting to see what is it that your brain latches onto first. You know, and it might be, I know that answer, as opposed to looking for signifiers. Okay. Similarly, only one here that we know, I couldn't get it to not be a moving one, sorry about that. I mean, the only one we know is in detention. Anyone know which one we know is in detention here? Maybe Molly Ringwald, because that's from Breakfast Club. Really good. When you get into something like this, it's like, okay, so which ones feel more honor student-y? I was tempted to see if I could find one where two of them are the same kid but dressed differently. But just recognizing what are the things that your brain latched onto as the sign of laziness. And then this is a real important one here. What do people latch onto of what makes someone threatening? You know, just a size difference here would be, oh, it's actually from an article about how much it sucks to be short, because apparently she's like 4 feet tall. But recognizing this is something that your brain is hardwired to do as quickly as possible, not necessarily as accurately as possible. And that's what implicit bias is your brain doing that shortcut as quickly as possible. And what do you end up with? Well, what some researchers decided to do is try and figure out how to actually measure this. And they came up with a brilliant way to measure it. Raise your hand if you did go to this link, because I put it in the email and encourage people to try and go and do it. Yeah, we got some people that went and did it. Had you done it before? Anyone who did it for the first time last night? You can always type in any comments you have about what that was like. I definitely recommend everybody to go do it. It's interesting, they started with just a racial one and now they've got a whole bunch of different ones to choose from there. But what they started with is, it's just sorting. So on a keyboard, you got push one key, you know, left hand or right hand. If it's a black face, you hit with one hand, white face hit with the other hand. And so it measures how quickly can you look at that and categorize it accurately. Then you do the same thing with positive words and negative words. And then they start lumping them together and say, okay, now if it's a black face or a negative word, hit your left button. If it's a white face or a positive word, hit your right button. And then they switch the positive and the negative. And they sometimes switch the left and right, so it's not just a dominant hand thing happening either. And what they're measuring is, after they get the baseline of how slow you are to make these links, is it easier for you to use the same hand and the same response for positive things as for white faces, or negative things and black faces. That would be what implicit bias is that it just fits easier to put a positive or negative tone to a black or a white face. And if you go and you do it and you're kind of, I'm not so sure about this. One thing that we are very polarized on and flat out honest about is politics. So one of the other tests they have that you could take this whole test and decide you totally don't believe a word of it, go back and do it again, but pick the president's one instead. Because at the end, they ask various questions because they're collecting other data. And then they ask whether you believe or disbelieve the results of the test that you got. You know, how much do you think it was accurate for you? And I did it, and I was like, I was really tired. That's why I didn't do, I didn't get the score I wanted to. And so I don't really believe that it was accurate. And then I went back and did it again for presidents, where basically the same exact thing, positive, negative words, a black face of President Obama and a white face of President Trump. And you could just feel in your brain how easy or hard it was to make those associations. And so what it is this mathematically, quantifiably shows what your brain's established categories are, what your brain's established automatic gut reaction is. You know, if you walk into a room and there's 5 people there and you've got to very quickly figure out who's the person you would ask to help you with something, what does your gut tell you? Because most of what we do is what our guts tell us, not what our brains tell us. And so this is showing where that comes from. Okay, so where do we get these? Well, again, it's not born that way. This is the accumulation of experience. This is the categories from all the data your brain is constantly absorbing and has been absorbing since probably before you were born. Okay, so a lot of it is personal experience. You know, your family relationships, your friendships, your public interactions, you know, all the people you interact with, including seeing how other people interact. I mean, if you see someone you trust distrusting someone else, you're probably going to have more suspicion about the person who's being distrusted. If someone you trust vouches for someone, you are quicker to trust that person. If you have a positive experience with this person, it gets categorized by your brain as good, positive regard. If you have a negative experience, then it's negative regard. And here's a key one. If it's an empty, if you've got no experience of this at all, your brain doesn't know how to categorize it. It kind of seizes up. It's like, I don't know where to put that one. They might put them with whatever's most similar. At the very least, if you're like, no, we don't have time, make a decision right now, brain, your brain's going to say better safe than sorry and is going to put them more towards the don't fully trust them side. Be a little bit suspicious. Proceed with caution because we aren't sure about this. So people who think that race is not an issue for them because they never run into people of other races because everyone in their life looks and acts and believes exactly the same as them, you've got a problem, because that means your brain has a data deficit for doing this. And whenever you do encounter people who are different from you, your brain's gonna go, oh, I've got to figure out what to do with this one. That's hard. And our brains are, I mean, our brains do tons, but they are intrinsically lazy. So they will have an immediate, let's just assume bad until I decide otherwise, reaction to that. On, again, a very subliminal subconscious level. We also get a lot, not just from our personal interactions, but from the media all around us. And the media has a very, very strong racial bias. Okay, you look at the news and it's inescapable. You know, this picture here, these 6 people were all arrested for the same crime. These were the pictures the news showed of Black people who were arrested for burglary. And they decided to use the yearbook photos from a prep school for the white kids who have broken into a house and stolen things. And so you get that sort of thing where the images that are shown of people of color are very much more negatively portrayed. The news tends to use words that are very much more negative. You know, after the, or during Katrina, when there's news coverage of what people were doing in Katrina, and you'd have a picture of a Black person come, you know, wading waist deep through the floodwaters, holding up a package of diapers. It's diapers, okay? Clearly this is something needed back where they're coming from. And it was listed as, look at them looting. 5 minutes later, same news thing, shows a white person coming out carrying anything. Oh, look, they're scavenging for supplies. So that sort of skew happens all the time in the news. In TV and movies, we see lots and lots of modeling, and TV and movies are extraordinarily powerful, for good or for bad. A lot of positive regard comes from people feeling warm and fuzzy. Oh, you know, I don't know any gay people, but I watched Will and Grace and he seems so nice. Maybe I don't hate them after all. You know, people will shift their attitudes based on what they see. Problem is, they will also solidify their attitudes based on what they see. Media is trying to sell tickets, and tickets sell more to people who watch more. People watch more things that are familiar, things that are different from what they expect. It's more challenging. And so that might be a little bit harder for them to watch, and they might not watch as much. So there's a strong pressure to have whatever portrayals you have be as familiarly stereotypical as possible. You don't want to have the audience have to go, wait, really? You can have a college with Black people in it? I didn't know that until A Different World came along. And so it's harder to get those shows going. And instead, you end up with a preponderance of portrayals that fit the stereotypes, okay? Or who just keep them as sort of just kind of background token things. You know, there was a thing of just among the villains, the white villains had names. The Black villains weren't even given names in various movies, okay? They're less likely to show them having positive, happy lives, okay? Because again, society really wants to reinforce the idea that, isn't it nice to be you, to the dominant culture. They're less likely to show them being professional, and they're more likely to show them being focused on being physically strong rather than mentally strong. And if you prefer statistics, if you think, oh yeah, that's just kind of what people are cherry picking, some people sit down and they watch TV for a living and they do the math, okay? So in the media, when they're showing poor people, 59% of the poor people portrayed in TV and movies are Black. Real life, people below the poverty line, Blacks account for 27% of them, okay? But if you're on media and you're looking for a poor white person, you gotta look hard, because even though there's 66% of the actual population on TV and movies, you only see 17% of the poor people that are portrayed being cast as white actors. There's a lot of showing white fathers being, you know, dad, you know, being the present involved father. And there's a lot of portrayal of Black fathers being absent. You know, single mom, single mom, single mom. And people will say, well, look at the statistics in society. The statistics you see in society are marriage rates, not parent rates, okay? Because remember, marriage, parenting, separate relationships. And unmarried couples are listed as if the Black father, for Black families, are listed as if the father is just gone, ghosted on them. When if you actually count, if you look at Black and white dads and do surveys counting how often do you give the kid a bath, how often do you take the kid to a doctor's appointment, how often do you sit and do the homework with the kid, they actually came up with stats showing that, oh, in real life, actually, Black fathers tend to be more actively involved in their kids' lives. This was from a thing about families. And since I sent the whole PowerPoint, you can look in the notes section for the sites that these came from. Family members being criminals, 37% of the time for Black families in the media, when in real life, It's 26% of criminals are Black, and lower percent of whites on TV have criminals in their family, whereas whites are a larger percentage of people actually arrested for committing crimes. So when we get to school, because one of the words in the title is education, we also have some disturbing statistics, you know, that Blacks are disproportionately not represented in gifted and talented programs. And if they're in a school that is predominantly minority, they're in a school that is far less likely to have algebra and college prep courses or AP classes and so on. Black students might be only 18% of the enrolled kids, but they make 48% of the kids suspended. People say, well, you know, it's the behavior. Okay, we're talking about preschoolers here. This is in preschool that already there's this disproportionate focus on, I mean, suspending a preschooler. Once you get past preschool, Blacks are 4 times more likely to be suspended and twice as likely to be expelled as their white counterparts. And the way this falls out gender-wise is that boys 3 times more likely, because girls are 6 times, a Black girl is 6 times more likely to be suspended than a white girl of the same age. And it's not, there aren't statistics for the interactions that happen constantly, but obviously it's not like everything's fine and then someone's suspended. There's all kinds of interactions going on before that, which people say, well, you know, they didn't just suspend them, they were doing all these bad things before. I'm like, yeah, and before, every day they were having this similarly disproportionate response to whatever behavior there was. You know, I was reading one article where a high schooler was talking about how, you know, she and her friends were out of class without a pass, walking down the hall, and the vice principal comes along and he's like, oh, come on, you girls, you know you're supposed to be in class. And so they kind of laugh and they head off to class, and behind them they hear him turn and say, what are you guys doing here? Redirecting a group of Latino boys who are also not in class. And she looked over and she's like, those guys all have higher GPAs than we do, but we're treated very, very differently by the people around them. And this is something that is a constant experience for everyone there, not just the kids being targeted, but all the other kids who are seeing this as an example of the way you should expect a person of color to be treated. And so it contributes to the worldview of everyone, not just minority kids. Now, the impact on learning is kind of huge. Stress impairs learning. Okay, I've got a whole presentation about trauma and how hard it is to learn when your brain keeps dropping into a trauma zone. When your brain is getting knocked into a trauma zone because you have an antagonistic, hostile relationship with all of the adults in the school, or you worry that you might, that's going to contribute to it as well. You know, living in a racially charged world is stressful, okay? And then on top of it, the kids have the stress of, am I gonna be getting in trouble all the time? Am I gonna be getting yelled at all the time? You know, the same behavior that I do and the white kid next to me does, the teacher yells at me and the teacher, in a more quiet voice, redirects the other student. That sort of thing happening very, very often. And even if that isn't happening, a lot of times it's because you got a lot of minority kids who are constantly working their butts off to desperately try not to look like that kind of kid, because they don't want to confirm the stereotype. If they do anything that makes them look like a behavior problem, then they feel like they're causing the racism, and thus they're wound very tightly trying to prevent that. So there's also, quite aside from discipline, there's also the academic things of, are they treated subtly or overtly like, yeah, I don't expect you to do as well at this. I don't expect you to know as much about this. I don't expect you to do as well on this test, and so on. You get that happening to you constantly as you're growing up, you're very likely to just absorb that as, yep, it must be true. I'm not going to do as well on the test. I'm not going to read books as much. Or if I feel like no matter what I do, I'm going to be getting in trouble, I'm going to stop caring so much about how well I do. You know, I'm going to grow into whatever identity I think is the identity that I'm defined to have, because kids will respond to their environment and kind of conform to what they expect is the definition of who they are. And even if you don't have discipline problems, academic problems, anytime you are the only one or in a severe minority in a group, we all grew up with Sesame Street. You know, one of these things just doesn't belong. And there's this constant being different stress that we might not be able to do anything about other than really making people feel welcome, going out of your way to be welcoming to everyone, because it's really draining to constantly feel like, yeah, one of these things just doesn't belong. And it does not help that you could work twice as hard, and if you succeed, you have a very real chance of people going, oh, well, they just let you in because you're Black. You're just a token. You don't really deserve to be here. You know, they have a lower test score for your kind to be able to get in here. You don't deserve to be here for real. And you might look and say, well, you know, that school does have different, you know, test scores. Well, Harvard had the whole thing about having different ranks for Asian and white and minorities and so on to try and get the diverse population they want. But I heard a really great thing from a baseball coach saying, you know, if I see two kids in front of me and one of them all of his life had his dad playing baseball with him and he's been on teams for the last 3 years and he's a pretty good pitcher, and another kid had nothing, had no practice, had, you know, he managed to get a ball and a bat and he's been doing the best he can on his own, and he's an okay pitcher. He's like 80% of what the other kid is. Which one do I want on my team? I want that second kid, because if he's that good with nothing, imagine what he can do once he starts getting some actual coaching. I was like, wow, that's right. You know, if you've got someone who, even though they did not have a lot of the supports that would foster academic success, you know, if you got two people and one of them got a 1,500 on the SAT and they did tutoring prep and test prep and had a coach, and another person did not have all of that and they got a 1,400 on the SAT, it is not unreasonable to decide that the 1,400 might be a better choice. And so the fact that someone might be arriving with lower objective scores does not in any way mean that they don't belong there. But that's what other people will constantly be saying to them. Well, maybe not constantly, but frequently enough that it's really a drain. So expectations have a direct impact on performance. And what I mean by direct is, if you want to skew a test, these are some studies I looked up that are so, I mean, they're hilarious how you can skew a test. Okay, we start with just the first one, is the whole growth mindset that you may have heard about. And what they did was they took a bunch of, I think, 5th graders, and they gave them a sort of math test that was just within their grasp. Okay, so they all could succeed at that test. And half of them, they said, wow, you did a great job, you're so smart. And the other half, they said, wow, you did a great job, you worked really hard at that. And then they gave them all a harder test, just beyond their reach. The ones who've been told that they were smart gave up much earlier. The ones who were told that they worked hard kept working at it longer. And then afterwards, they asked them which test did they like better. The ones who were told that they were smart liked the first test. The ones who were told that they worked hard liked the second test. Because we have planted in them who they are, their sense of identity. These kids, you are smart. I take a test, I do well. Yes, I am smart. I take a test, I am not able to do well on this one. Maybe I'm not smart. That's scary. It's challenging my identity. I kind of want to run away. So I'm going to stop doing that test. I'm not going to like that test. I like the test that confirmed that I'm smart. This group were told they work hard. I do this test, I work hard. I do this test, I work even harder. It confirms my identity even more. So I'm going to keep doing it. And so just getting kids to try harder on a test. In that one study, in one afternoon, they could do it just by the words they used to those kids. Everyone's heard of there being a math test that math is somehow inherently more a masculine activity. So they took a bunch of women and gave them all the same math test. But half of them, they said, we're testing out this new math test. You may have heard that math tests have a gender bias. This one has been carefully written and designed to get rid of the gender bias. So this one does not have the gender bias that typically appears in math tests. This group, they didn't say that. And the group that were told there was no gender bias in the test did better on the test, same exact test. They took a bunch of athletes, people who were in school on athletic scholarships, got them all, you know, equal levels and so on. And they're going to take the standardized test. And there's a demographic section to the standardized test. Part of the demographic question asks them if they are on an athletic scholarship and what sport do they play. Simple little question. Half of them, the demographic question was before the test. Half of them, the demographic question was after the test. The people who had been primed with the reminder of, you're a jock, right? You're here on an athletic scholarship, aren't you? Did worse on the test than the people who hadn't had that poked into their head just before they took the test. Similarly, they took a bunch of white guys and black guys and gave them doing golf skills. So it's not just academic tests, you know, doing like putting. I don't know what you do for golf, but they told them, again, they split them up and yada, yada. Half of them, they say, this is a test to measure athletic intelligence. And half of them, they said, this is a test to measure your inherent athletic prowess or talent. And on the ones where they called it intelligence, the blacks did worse and the whites did better. And on the ones where they called it athletic inherent talent, the blacks did better and the whites did worse. And for a wonderful big honkin' huge example, in the months right around when Obama was getting elected, people noticed interesting things happening to standardized tests. And so they started collecting and looking at it. And the racial difference, you know, the racial divide in performance on standardized tests totally changed. Not in like an experimental context, but like out in real life. The standardized test scores for minority students went up after he gave the speech at the convention, after he got nominated, and when he got elected. Some tests, the racial gap disappeared for about 3 months. So there's a couple articles saying it isn't real. That was when they tried to make it be an experiment. When they took some people and like primed them by talking about Obama and then gave them a test and didn't prime them. But when they looked at just the raw data out in the real world, there was a definite effect of just having a black man publicly doing that well raised the expectations and thus raised the performance for a big chunk of the population. So steps to take to try and help deal with all of this in life, okay? When you're in school, just be aware that it's there. Recognize that implicit bias is a subconscious thing. It's an automatic thing. It's like confirmation bias. I mean, it's a big part of confirmation bias. If you expect someone to not do as well, you notice when they don't do well more than you notice when they do well. Confirmation bias. If you expect someone to be a behavior problem, you notice it more. Whether it's a racial thing or whether it's that experiment that I talked about in the ADHD thing where they give some kids sugar and some kids non-sugar and they tell half the parents, they lie to half the parents about whether their kid had sugar. When the parents are expecting their kids to have bad behavior, they respond more strongly to the bad behavior that happens, which results in there being more bad behavior. I'm not saying that that there might not be actual more bad behavior. But if someone is riding your ass all the time, yes, you're going to have more bad behavior. So be aware of that. Notice it in yourself. And anything that is an assessment, do your best to have objective assessments out there. You know, they're looking at, if you got a school system that has personal referrals to gifted and talented programs, and another system that has just give everybody a standardized test to screen for gifted and talented, you get more racially diverse selection when you don't have a person selecting, when it's an objective standard instead. You want to have a wide variety of role models out there, and not just during Black History Month. Not having it be like, okay, and now this is the month when we take Black history out of the closet and we have it, and then we're going to put it back in the closet where it belongs for the next 11 months. No. Whenever there's a subject that comes up, you can find people of all different races, all different genders, all different ethnicities to be representatives. So providing a wide variety of role models. And again, for everyone, because it's not just role modeling for people who look similar to that, but also good experience for everyone to have that exposure, okay? Avoid assuming in any conversation with anyone that you know what their experience is. You know, this is one of the, we in nursing, we always have the cultural competency testing or training, what to do to be culturally competent. And then what they usually end up doing in the books is they give you like a handful of very, not even stereotypical, but like anecdotal. You know, this culture does this culture does this culture does this, as if it would be remotely appropriate to go forward and decide that everyone in that culture does that. You know, an infuriating example I had was when I was in my maternity rotation. And I had a Hispanic patient who was desperately trying to breastfeed, and the kid was not latching on. And I could see that there was a note on the bassinet in nurse jargon, so the mom had no idea what it said, that was saying, give formula at nighttime. And I went to the teacher and I'm like, can we talk to the nurse about the fact that she's sabotaging this mother's ability to breastfeed? And the teacher's response was, oh, that's something they do in Hispanic culture. They go ahead and they give bottles until the milk comes in. And even though we always would say that that would sabotage it, for some reason it works for them. Like, it's not working for her, and she did not sign off on this, and you're basically discounting her concerns based on her last name. That's not okay. So don't assume that you know what the person's experience is based on any aspect of them. Okay, do not universalize your own. Do not expect that everybody is doing the same thing. Invite people to share their experiences. Be open to it. Do not drag them out and insist on it, but just make it clear that you are open and curious. You know, I don't know what's going on for you. Love to hear about it if you wanted to share. Not, okay, now tell me, what has this been like for you? So, and when you do have someone who is sharing, recognize that they're talking about what they have experienced. Okay, it is their experience. If it is different from yours, well, yeah, they're not you. That just makes sense. Okay, it's not a competition, it's not a comparison, it's not a judgment, it's not an accusation. If theirs is different from what you expected, or from what someone else who looks vaguely similar to them told you happened to them, again, different people have different experiences, and that's okay. I mean, part of inviting people to share their experience means making it clear to them that once they do, you're not going to argue with them and insist that they had the wrong experience. Because after all, it's different from mine or that other. Say, no, okay, whatever they experienced is what they experienced, okay? Don't ball them out for being different. And also, don't call them out to say, okay, now tell us, what do Black people feel about this? Because again, their experience is their experience. Be open to it. Do not force them to share it. And if they do choose to share it, do not tell them that they now have to be representing everybody, because they don't and they shouldn't have to. So. Now, you might see a lot of stuff out there about non-racist versus anti-racist. This is like one of the new hot topics among the allies. I say, well, I'm not racist, therefore I'm all done, right? You know, it's like we go and we check a box. If you're not racist, okay, yeah, you're done. You can go. It's like testing out a prerequisite for a class. You know, if you're not racist, okay, you pass. You don't have to do any of this stuff. It's not the way the world works. Okay. But being non-racist or affirming non-racism is pretty quick and easy. It does not take much time or effort. Okay. Being anti-racist, that's a bit more of a commitment, okay? Because being non-racist is focused pretty much on what do you think or feel. You know, are you racist? No? Okay, you're done. Whereas being anti-racist is about, you know, what do you believe, because that's going to drive it, but what are you doing? So you're not all done once you decide people are equal. You got to actually potentially be doing stuff about it too, okay? Now, being non-racist is nice because you are focused on not hurting people, okay? The point of being I'm not racist is I'm not going to do that horrible racist thing that I saw in that video. It tends to come right next to the idea of, therefore you shouldn't complain to me about the video because I'm not in the video and I'd never do anything like that. So can we go talk about ice cream instead? Because it's really not, it's not relevant because I'm not racist. As opposed to being anti-racist is saying, it doesn't matter who inflicted the pain. Yeah, it wasn't me, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the pain, not talking about whether to feel guilty about it or not, okay? Being non-racist might, again, look at disparities, but then say, but I didn't cause the disparities. I'm not causing the harm. Therefore, again, conversation's over, right? Can we go do something else now? Because I'm not part of the problem. Whereas the anti-racist approach is saying, yeah, if the disparity is still there, yeah, we're all part of the problem because we aren't fixing it, okay? It's like if someone gets hit by a car and they're lying there broken on the side of the road, coming along and saying, well, you know, I don't even drive, so I did not hurt that person, so I'm gonna keep going now, is not okay, versus saying, doesn't matter who hit them, we can deal with that later. Right now, we need to help what's going on. And lots of times the reason why we scuttle away from the disparities is because we don't really want to acknowledge the fact that if we're still benefiting from it, we are kind of in on it, even if we didn't set it up that way. It's like, if I didn't make the rule for a country club to not let Blacks or Jews in, that doesn't make it okay for me to join the country club. Just because I didn't make the rule, I still would not want to benefit from it. You know, if I'm not actively going to dismantle that club, maybe I got too much on my plate and I don't have time. Okay, the least I can do is acknowledge that belonging to the club ain't okay. And if it's a club that I can't help but be part of, you know, you don't really like sign anything to be treated better in a store or more able to get a loan, then, well, I'm stuck with the fact that I'm in that club and now it's kind of on me to do something about that, because otherwise it is very much the same as having gone ahead and joined the club, okay? Non-racism has a lovely idea of wanting to live in a world that is colorblind, where race just doesn't matter. Except, first of all, race just doesn't matter generally is shorthand for, we'll just pretend everybody's white. You know, it's kind of shorthand for, I don't think you're strange at all. I think you're just like a normal person, which is really not the compliment that the person might think they're trying to make. Instead, it's saying, you know, this thing that's like a really important aspect of you, I am going to decide does not matter and is not important to you or anyone, which is not okay. You know, I would like to live in a world where there is no persecution based on religion. That does not mean that we need to live in a world where everybody is agnostic. If religion is really important to this person, I need to not say that my goal in the world is where there is no religion. I'd like to have my goal in the world be where they can have important religion and someone else cannot have important religion, and they're in the same world, and that's okay. So it's a world that takes more work, though, which is really, again, the uphill battle, because work is hard. People, it's hard to have to do extra work, and it's really kind of hard to get people to get that it's worth it. You know, most of my personal experience around this has been around more issues of culture and language. My kids went to a two-way bilingual school, and my mom never could understand why, because, you know, she's not quite, but right next to that whole, if English was good enough for Jesus, then it's good enough for me kind of camp. Definitely that if anyone is speaking a foreign language in her presence, they must be talking about her, and that's rude, as opposed to, no, Mom, you're not actually the center of the universe. They're just talking about whatever. But we would have the school board come to talk to us and getting the school board members to recognize that, yeah, it's gonna take time because everything has to be said twice. You talk for a while and then you need to shut up and let the interpreter catch up. And yeah, that's a lot more work than everyone talking the same language. But we think it's worth it. You know, having things be different is a lot more work. Having clothes made in a variety of sizes is a lot more work, but I don't want to live in a world where all the clothes are the same size. I don't want to live in a world where everything is expected to be exactly the same, even if it fits me perfectly. It's a really boring world. But I also acknowledge that for people like my mom, it's a really stressful world to have it be, I don't even know what's going on. I don't even know what I'm supposed to call this person, or what pronoun to use, or why are they, you know, I can't understand them when they speak with an accent, and it's embarrassing to ask them to repeat it. Getting people to recognize that it's worth it. So where do we need to do all this stuff? Well, you know, everywhere. I mean, that's kind of obvious, okay? We need to stop having it be that this is something that we need to do whenever we are reminded that there are minorities in the world. You know, when it's on the news, or when, oh yes, now I see that little brown child in my classroom. Now I'm going to think about it. If you got a classroom that everybody looks exactly the same, and they all have the same language and the same religion, and it's kind of one of those really creepy, like the Stepford Wives kind of houses, you still need to be teaching them about this. Okay, it's not a problem just in diverse communities. We have to, first of all, recognize that no matter who's in your classroom, everyone's going home and turning on the TV, or sitting on a bench getting on a bus and seeing how people interact with each other, and seeing how the teacher talks to the different kinds of kids in the classroom, and so on. Everyone is soaking in the culture we have, and the culture is definitely racist. So we've got to get that. And we've got to recognize that if you are in a little homogenous bubble, you need to work really, really hard to expose yourself to a variety. Because first of all, if you live in a homogenous bubble, the only input you get is what you get from the TV. And it ain't good, okay? And even if oh, I don't watch TV, I'm fine. Okay, fine. You spend all of your life never seeing anyone who doesn't look exactly like you. You know, heck, right now, you probably only see people who are actively related to you because we're all in lockdown. But when you encounter anything that is different from what is expected, your brain is hardwired to say, hold on a second, I'm not so sure about that. And have sort of a cautious, suspicious reaction to anything it doesn't know how to categorize. That's the neurological process going on. You got to be ready for it, and you got to actively address it. And the neat thing is, you can train your brain, because implicit bias is ongoing. It's not like your brain takes all the input it had until you were 5 years old and now you're good to go. It is constantly incorporating more and more and more. When new stuff is coming, the output is really embarrassing, but it's worth getting through that. Okay, so you want to recognize when it's happening. Okay, so if you have a knee-jerk gut reaction that is negative, well, first of all, if you notice the input that is bad, you see something in your environment that is prejudice, that is discriminatory, that is reinforcing a negative association between this category of people and negativity, notice it, consciously challenge it, at least mentally, out loud, in print, doing presentations, whatever rocks your boat. But if you are consciously saying, wait a second, that's wrong, that will at least slow down your brain's process of going, oh, I know where to put this, bad things. You know, it'll slow down that incorporating process. If possible, you look for opposing information. So if you are seeing lots of imagery of negative things, go and actively find imagery of positive things. So your brain at least has a variety to be categorizing. So if you see a negative portrayal of someone, go and Google that person. You know, you can find the school photos of Black people who are arrested too. You gotta look harder because the news will hand you their mugshot and hand you the school photo of the white kid. Feel free to go look up the mugshot of the white folks too. So seek out information that balances that out more, okay? When there are racial differences around you, don't be like, oh, colorblind society, that's ideal. Notice them. Notice when something is different. If you don't notice something, when you notice it afterwards, go ahead and feel embarrassed about it. You know, it is actually neurologically very unlikely that your brain did not notice the race of that person who walked by, okay? So when you shunt that aside and suppress that, ooh, that's different, reaction that your brain has, the fact that you're shying away from it, the fact that you're having a, oh, I should not be having that thought, that I noticed that, again, cues your brain that, ooh, something bad happened here. This was bad. You know, if you have a negative reaction, even if you think, oh, but it's a negative reaction of feeling guilty that I even noticed. It's not aimed at them, it's aimed at me. Your brain does not know the difference. Your brain just knows, ooh, saw a Black person, had a negative reaction, okay, Black, negative. You know, and a real good example of this is part of my mom's racism comes from, she grew up listening to her great aunts telling stories, and she's really old, they're really old, okay, my family, no one dies. And so they were kids in like the 1850s. And they lived in Wisconsin in one of those like everyone in one room kind of farmhouses. And one of the stories they told her that they vividly remember was when they were like 8 or 9 years old, waking up because they heard voices downstairs. And they're up in kind of the loft and they creep over and they look downstairs and their parents are awake in the middle of the night and they're talking to these people they've never seen before. And they not only have never seen these people, they've never seen anyone like these people, because these people had dark brown skin and they'd never seen anything like that in their lives. And so they're staring and everyone down there looks up and notices the kids are awake and they totally freaked out and scream at the children, get back in bed, get back there, do not ever tell anyone you saw this, and absolutely totally lost it on the kids to get them to shut up. As a result, and then they never talked about it again. They're like, never speak of it. And so as a result, it's very plausible that that is part of why my mom has kind of this different things are a little bit scary, more of a scary reaction to racial differences, because her aunts that talked to her all the time talked about how scary the parents were uncharacteristically freaking out. And that was associated with seeing people with dark skin. And so somehow I was raised never knowing that my ancestors were part of the Underground Railroad, because the kids involved were not to know about that because they would potentially say it to someone and then things would go badly for everyone. But the interest of keeping it secret from the kids gave the kids a negative association rather than the chance to feel proud of what their family was doing and sympathy and compassion for the people that were in a position to need that. So recognize that if you shy away from a racial notice, your brain will label that as that race bad. So don't shy away from it. Notice it, okay? Do your best to go out of your way to have exposure to unfamiliar groups, whether it's watching movies or going to restaurants you don't normally go or going to parades once we can do that again or anything like that. Just increase your exposure to as much variety as possible. And when something surprises you, feel good about that. You're like, ooh, I'm growing, that tickles. Because again, anything that is different is a challenge. That's what that startled feeling is your brain going, oh, I don't know what to do with this information. And your brain's immediate reaction is going to be negative. So you want to make that feeling of surprise be something that you're like, ooh, good, I'm so glad I got that feeling. So that it's a positive experience and will train your brain to classify it as positive instead of negative. Tech here is an app that strives to use implicit bias proactively to train your brain. And it's specifically a therapeutic. It's therapeutic something conditioning. Damn, I knew the words this morning. Anyhow, that's what the tech is, therapeutic something conditioning. And it's might be exposure. Anyhow, what it is it's a game. And you can play it like a game. That basically is trying to train people to have more of an aversive reaction to self-injury and substance abuse, because that's the treatment that it's trying to give, is give people more of a negative feeling towards behaviors that they'd like to be doing less of. So what they do is they'll show you 4 pictures, and there's a picture of some self-injury and a negative thing, like it might be a spider or something gross. And then there's 2 pictures that are positive, you know, people holding hands or the word myself, you know, because they're also training positive being associated with yourself. And then 2 pictures that are just neutral, you know, a vase, a chair. And then it'll show you pictures and you're supposed to touch the 2 that match from the first ones that you were done. So you're trying to actively, how fast can I touch the 2 bad things, the 2 good things, the 2 neutral things? And it goes through that. And you just see if you can get faster and faster and faster. And the only way to get faster is by getting your brain to automatically link bad thing, self-injury, good thing, myself. And so that's how it works. And I link at the end to an article about it actually having an impact and being useful in therapy. So it's very cool. And it's nice to know that implicit bias, people are like, ooh, no, it's a code word for racism and something to feel guilty about, and therefore I'm going to refuse to believe it exists. No, it's a neurological phenomenon that you can hack. You can hack your own brain and try to fix it, okay? So various links, and there are lots of links here, okay? This is the link to go do the implicit bias test. And like I said, they've got all kinds of different ones there. They got like a dozen different tests, okay? This is the article about tech. This is an article about the teaching kids about hard work versus being smart. And it also points out that just saying good job really doesn't work unless they actually worked hard. This is just advice of various things to do in the classroom to reduce discrimination. Various articles about the Obama effect when they noticed it. And this was a PowerPoint just about racism and its impact on education that I drew a lot of material from. So it's a very good one. There's so many reading lists out there. I decided to just give you access to other reading lists rather than picking out books myself, because I haven't read most of them, and so and you might find ones that you like better and so on. This list is kind of nice because it's got books on it, but it's also got like podcasts and TV shows and YouTube things, and so it's got a wide variety of different things. And oddly enough, it's Katie Couric. Anyway, but and then this one is a reading list that is very education focused. So if reading is what you want to do this summer, you got all the material in the world. If, on the other hand, you'd rather watch movies, there are, of course, a gazillion. I mean, now if you turn on Netflix, they've got a category that they just gave up and just call it Black Lives Matter. So you can go there and pick anything. But among the ones that are really, The Hate U Give is phenomenal. I saw that recently. I admit I have not seen most of these, but Bamboozled is one that is not on any of the lists. Does anyone know Savion Glover? Anyone ever hear of Savion Glover? He is the best tap dancer on the planet. He's just phenomenal. He used to be on Sesame Street. That's how we first met him. And we'll go, Savion. He was in a movie called Bamboozled that is about people being in a show where like a show decides to try and torpedo itself, sabotage itself by being a minstrel show in blackface, and instead it becomes popular. And it's really, it's frequently funny and extremely dark, and ultimately goes way downhill way fast. And we put it on when my kids were young because we love Savion, and my daughter's like, I remember when I was young and you made us watch that show and it was so traumatizing. So it's a little bit old for young kids, but it's very good and has amazing dancing and a lot about what it's like living in the media realm. There's lots of podcasts out there too that are really good. I actually haven't heard this one. I should have listed that. I haven't heard this one. But these are all quite good. Daily Show with Trevor Noah is doing a lot of good work right now. Snap Judgment is not specifically about race, but occasionally about race. The host of it, Glenn Washington, is very, very cool. And then when it comes to videos, there's tons out there. If you watch nothing, you have to watch at least two, because you got to watch both of these. Okay, this is the one with the experiment with the high schoolers lining up for the race about privilege, and this one is, some of you might have seen it because it's going around on social media. It was a woman, just, you know, someone filming her on her phone about the riots and about what's been going on and about where all of this rage comes from. And it's really, really hard to watch, but it is totally worth watching. It's absolutely a valuable thing to watch. And I made it to the end by noon. It's always a challenge when it's a new presentation because I have no freaking clue how long things will take. So if you have questions or want to discuss things more or want me to explain how to play that card game, put it in the Q&A. I'm going to peek at the comments in chat, and then people can continue to make comments in chat. But if you put a question in chat keeps scrolling and I lose seeing it. You can, of course, leave whenever you need to. Please do the evaluation because I do value the feedback. If you want to have the possibility, no guarantee, don't ask me about it, of getting a surprise extra certificate this summer, then put the code in the material request sheet. But otherwise, and as far as other materials to request, I sent everyone the PowerPoint, but I can send it again. I've only got a few items in there because it's not one of the presentations. I've been collecting items for years, so there's not a lot of items to request, but I went ahead and stuck numbers on them anyway, but I don't like have a poster of them. There's basically 3 things. If you just put all, I'll send you the 3 things I got, and one other that is another diagram for intersectionality. So someone's asking for the card game. I will do that as soon as I glance over here and see what comments there are over here about the screen coming and going. And okay, someone did the test. Wondered if it skewed the results at all. Oh, you got quicker. I got slower because I was really tired. I was thinking they ought to do the baseline where you're just matching just the faces or just the name, just the words at the beginning and again at the end to kind of even out whether you get faster or get slower. Oh, someone did get Obama and Trump, but got Jefferson. Wow. I gotta say, when I did it with Obama and Trump, it was like so easy. So it says they're the only minority in the office, and they're constantly expected to be representing their whole race, and that it's very, very stressful. And someone else about the test, and someone saying, only Black adult who's been encouraged by people who are not people of color stepping up to discuss how implicit bias and systemic racism impact all of our students and communities. One thing that I was fascinated to learn is Brown v. Board of Education. The Supreme Court ruling that found that separate was not equal and forced integration of schools was flawed in that it forced the integration of students. It did not force the integration of staff. And in the years right after Brown v. Board of Education, there were roughly 50,000 African-American teachers who were laid off, because it was just a given that, okay, well, we got to let the Black kids into the white schools, but we're sure as hell not going to have any of the white kids have a Black teacher. And so as a result, continuing, 40, 50 years later, we still have a huge racial divide among the teachers, and however underfunded and under-resourced the Black schools were before Brown v. Board of Education, the faculty was phenomenal because there were not other jobs available to brilliant, highly educated Black people. And so it was basically, if you were really amazing and could get a degree, you were a teacher. So the teachers these kids had were all, not all, nothing's 100%, but they were amazing role models for these kids. But they were in buildings that were falling apart and full of mold and had no books. And yeah, so the education overall was not up to snuff. But we kind of traded in all of that for, if only, the pushback would have been even worse if the insistence was that Black teachers also had to be welcomed. There would have been, as it was, we had the white flight of parents pulling their kids out and putting them in private schools instead of the integrated public schools. And that would have been even worse if there were Black teachers coming into the schools as well. But the downside is, there was a lot of really amazing role models that were just lost. Not lost, they lived, they existed, but the kids didn't get to have the constant exposure to them. Okay, so the card game. It's called Scum. It's a lot of fun. You play it with as many people as you want, 4 or more. You could do it with as many as you like. If you get too many, you just get more decks of cards. Can't have too many decks of cards. And what you do is you're sitting around the table and you pick one person. If you're the one explaining the game, you pick yourself. You say, okay, I am queen. Person to my left is the prince or princess. And then middle class, until I come around here. Second to last is peasant, and the person on my right is scum. Okay? And now we deal out all the cards. Now, since you've got a random number of people and who knows how many decks, then it's not going to come out even. So, you finish dealing, and you're like, oh, I've got like 3 extra cards. Okay, scum, peasant, and the lowest middle class person get the extra cards. They all start with extra cards. But that's not enough. So now we look at our cards, and you're sorting your cards by height, strength, and pairs and triplets are stronger. So it goes from 2, 3, 4, 5, like king, queen, or queen, king, ace. Next thing higher than an ace is a pair of 2s, and then a pair of 3s, and then 4s, 5s, pair of queens, pair of kings, pair of aces. The next thing higher than a pair of aces would be 3 2s. Got it? That sort of thing. So you've sorted all your cards. And now the scum looks at their cards, and they have to give the queen their 2 best cards, regardless of pairs or anything. So if they've got an ace and a pair of kings, they're giving me an ace and a king. And they don't get to have a pair anymore. Sorry, broke that one up. In exchange, though, because I'd have too many cards then, I've got to have less cards, I'm going to give the scum 2 cards of my choice. At which point the dominant obsequious attitude begins to present, because I always feel like I'm such a nice person that I give them my 2nd and 3rd lowest cards, not my worst card, because I know I can get rid of that on the very first turn, so I don't need to get rid of it on them. Isn't that nice of me? I don't dump on them as much as I could have. So I give them my 2 worst cards. The peasant and the prince do the same thing by exchanging 1 card. If you got a lot of people, you could expand it and have it be 3 cards, 2 cards, 1 card, whatever you like. As long as there's an exchange where I get good cards and I give up whatever I don't feel like having. So now we've all got our cards. I start and I play my lowest card. The next person plays anything higher than that. And higher and going around, just pile of cards in the middle. So when it goes up, I play a 2, next person a 5, then a 10, then someone plays an ace. And the next person who's sitting there with the queen's like, why did you have to play an ace? Now I can't play my queen because you have to go higher. So now if they played an ace, I have to play a pair of something, and so on and so forth. If you can't play, or if you want to hold it back for a future round, you pass. If everybody passes, you know, I play 3 5s, everybody, I'll go pass, 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 pass. Everybody passes, we clear that pile away, and I start over again. That's how I get rid of my singleton 5 I want to get rid of. And so whether you pass or not, sometimes it's like, okay, if the last person who played is just before me, I might go ahead and pass, because if they lead, it'll be good enough. And I want to save that pair for later when I really need it. But you'll notice that if you've got lots of pairs and triplets, you're going to get rid of your cards faster, because you not only are stronger, but you're also getting rid of more cards on one turn. So we just keep going round and round and round until someone, usually the king or queen, runs out of cards, and they're like, yay, I'm the king next time. Everyone else keeps playing, and you just keep going, and you see who goes out second, third, fourth, so on, until whoever goes out last, they're going to be scum in the next round. It's usually the person who was scum in the first round. Because it really shows how, if everything is set up in your favor in the first place, you're likely to win. And if stuff is set up badly for you in the first place, it's really, really hard to win. And you start feeling like, if you're scum, you feel good about maybe moving up a chair or two. If you're king or queen, you feel awful if you don't get to be king or queen again. Get very clingy to that top level. So it's a really cool game for teaching people that sort of thing. And what I've seen whenever people are playing it is when someone on the lower side does well, and they're like, the scum becomes king, which does happen sometimes, they will immediately say, I had such lucky cards. I was so lucky that I got dealt this. Unlike one study they did where they had people play Monopoly, and they went out of their way to preset it where they gave people extra money and property to start and gave other people nothing, and then had them play Monopoly. And then when the person who started 3/4 the way to winning won, they interviewed them afterwards, and most of them would say, well, it's just I'm really good at this game. It's amazing that people will be that blind to the inherent privilege that just in the game, where you'd think they wouldn't have such a gut reaction rejecting thing. But people are very invested in, no, I get what I deserve. If I get this, it's because I earned it. I deserve it. Part of it is because otherwise I might have to feel bad about the fact that other people don't have it. I don't want to feel bad. I want to feel good. So I'm going to feel proud and ignore the people who didn't get it, as opposed to recognizing that, wow, but for the grace of God go I. Ooh, that makes me feel vulnerable. That makes me feel not secure in the glorious life I have. And that's uncomfortable. So it's better for me to feel like I'm rock solid. I'm here because this is where I belong, because I earned it. I deserve it. And their life sucks, but you know, it's probably punishment from God or something. So, and you'll notice religion did that a lot too. It was funny because even when religion tried not to, because Christian Protestants were trying desperately to say, no, it's nothing you earn, it's grace. God forgives everyone equal. Everyone's equal in the eyes of God. So everyone, you get to heaven by grace, not by your acts. At which point people are like, but how do I know I'm going to heaven? You know, I bet if God knows I'm coming to heaven, he's going to give me a good life here too. So if I am rich now, that is just a sign that I'm one of the ones graced to go to heaven because God likes me. And that's why I'm rich. And that's where you get the Protestant work ethic, because Protestantism was trying to say, no, it's not how much money you donate to the priest. It's grace that gets you into heaven. And immediately people were like, oh yeah, but we need to have wealth in there somewhere. So how about if I'm rich, it's a sign that I've got the grace, and I'm going to work really hard to be rich so that I can show the world that I'm going to heaven. So sorry, religion major sometimes pops out on me. Let's see, someone else wrote something up here. Okay. Okay. Having a good weekend, difficult and uncomfortable subject. there's lots of stuff out there about non-racist versus anti-racist. I gave a very, very superficial view of it, so definitely go look into it more. There's a lot of great stuff out there. Okay. People of color and the stress ability to learn, access housing. They see people of color and Black coworkers not valuing their work, being to work on time, valuing attendance. They feel reverse discrimination as they feel they are expected to work harder more often and to work on time. Privileged friends and neighbors feel less privileged. I say, I can see you feel less privileged here, but people of color still have it more difficult and have had it more difficult as they grew up. It's like when you've got someone who's got like a learning disability and they get extra time on the test. It's like, yeah, they get 10 minutes more on a test that is, they've got so much more making it harder for them. It's just trying to even things out insufficiently. But people have that zero-sum thing going a lot as well. Let's see. Okay, just other comments there. Are there any other questions from anyone? Anyone at all? Okay, definitely go watch things, go read things, go listen to things, go talk to people. If you see someone in your circle who is of a different race or ethnicity, talk to them. Do not interview them. Have a conversation. Don't go and say, hey, I've been wondering, what is it like for you to have? No, just go and have a conversation with them. Because that's the other thing, is that lots of dominant folks are like, yes, I will now go talk to Black people. I will ask them what it's like to be Black. And then I'll be done with that conversation. It's like, no, just have a conversation. You know, and you'll get people who are like, well, you know, they want us to be interested in them. But then when I go up and ask them about them, they get mad. It's like, well, yeah, if the only conversations anyone ever has is, hello, would you like to now give me a course for free on the subject? That's when people say, just go read some books. Go do your own research and then come and have a conversation. Maybe if you got some questions after you've read the books, that might be good. But even if you've got a specific thing like that, it's a gift that you are asking from them, not something that they owe you. And it should not be that either you give me this gift of representing your entire race to me and answering my questions and educating me on this issue, or we're having no conversation at all. It should be, no, we're gonna have a conversation anyway because I'm a human being, you're a human being, and we talk. Why not? Because, you know, we can. We got voices. Let's talk. Let's talk about whatever. And if what they say is something different from what I experience, be interested in that. Maybe ask some follow-up questions about their experience. Not rushing to say, well, that's weird, I do it this way, but say, oh, really? You know, or if you hear something that really sparks for you and you just really want to blurt it out to someone, you can blurt it out, but don't have it be, and now it is your obligation to tell me your side. But just say, I just heard this and I just could not believe it. And then if they want to join in, they will. And if they don't, you know, you could say, I get that you might not want to talk about this, but if you do, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it whenever you got time. That sort of thing. Like I just heard, I mean, there's things that we as white folks don't even know, but like, did you hear the thing about Walmart and hair care products? I just heard, and this is something, well, I don't do Walmart in general, but I never knew that at Walmart, they always kept Black hair care products in a locked cabinet. White hair care products are on the shelf. But if you are Black and you come for hair care products, you have to go find someone to unlock the cabinet. Like, I never knew that until Walmart made a big, hey, look at us, aren't we great? We just decided to stop doing that and just put them on a shelf like everything else. It's like where to begin with that? How much that packs into making it inconvenient, making it stigmatizing, and oh, by the way, a nice subtle way of saying, we think you're gonna steal this because you're just that kind of person. I mean, how ridiculous is that? And when you hear something like that, feel free to have a conversation with someone about it. But you know, it doesn't have to be a conversation just with any Black person you have to meet. Feel free to have that conversation with other white people because you're allowed to be indignant. when racism happens, because it is a bad thing in the world, and it's your world too. I mean, to me, I didn't hear about Juneteenth until a couple years ago, and I'm pissed because, you know, it should not be a Black holiday. It should be a human decency holiday. I mean, if you felt proud to be part of a country that now finally has a Supreme Court that said you can't fire someone just for being gay, you know, feel proud of the country for doing that. Yay, that's a good thing. And I feel invested in being in a country that does that good thing. I had a country that was really, really shitty for a long time. Still is. But when they finally stopped doing this one slavery thing, and then when they finally got around to telling everyone that they'd stopped doing the one slavery thing. Oh yeah, and then when the army arrived and actually made Galveston follow what they'd already told. Okay, so there were many steps there of foot dragging. But anyway, if Juneteenth is generally, in its most superficial way, celebration of the fact that, yeah, we realize slavery is a bad thing and we shouldn't do it anymore, I'd like that to be something that everybody celebrates. Because absolutely, way worse to be a slave. But I think on some soul level, on your heart, on your who you are as a person, being a citizen of a country that does that is also a bad thing. And so when you're part of a country that has decided to not do that anymore, that is something for everyone to celebrate. Yeah, I know lots of people were totally not celebrating it even now, but it's not just the people who aren't slaves anymore, but the people who, I mean, I imagine the abolitionists kind of wanted to party too. And so it should be something that the whole country says, hey, proud, you know, we're really proud that we did this. Instead of it being something like, oh yeah, that's something for them. We aren't proud of this. It's like, how can we not be proud of the end of slavery? How can that not be something that is a joyful celebration for everyone? Very different celebrations for different races. You know, I don't want to crash anyone's parties, but still, I feel embarrassed to not know about it. So I know about it now. Yay. Okay, so any other, let's see. Oh, someone talking about people asking, where are you from? There was a brilliant, trying to remember what would be the best search terms on YouTube. It was a interaction of a Korean woman with a white dude who's asking her where she was from. And she's like, Santa Cruz? Because she was kidding. And so she then flipped it, and I'm pretty sure it was one where she's asking this white guy where he's from. No, I mean, like Scandinavia. I mean, you look so pale, and just doing the same kind of stupid where are you from shit to someone. It also, like I said, I mostly have spent time with people who are more linguistic minorities and English as a second language, and it just pisses me off how much people equate speaking clear, unaccented, generally white Midwestern accented English is considered intelligent. Anything else is not intelligent. There's some great anecdote I came across of someone talking to a Black student, and the Black student saying that, I'm not going to say it because I don't know the phrase, but he said in Black dialect something about not having the materials with him. And the teacher was like, I will answer that question when you speak to me properly. And he looked at her and said, at my home, that is proper. There's nothing wrong about my language. It's just not your language. It is different. It is not less than or worse than. It's just different. And you shouldn't refuse to answer that kid for not using the words in the exact same order as refusing to answer a question from someone with an accent unless they can say it without an accent. It's like, no, communication is communication. And it used to really piss me off because one of my best friends is Chinese, and the way she would get treated like an idiot all the time, and it's like, it just pisses me off. I'm like wanting to take white folks aside and say, by the way, do you have any idea how much way smarter than her, or way smarter than you she is? I mean, I know that just because I know how smart she is, but it's really clear, given how stupid you clearly are from this conversation I've witnessed just now, how stupid you are in your assumptions. It just pissed me off that people would treat someone just because they have an accent as being stupid. I'm like, okay, this person is speaking 2 languages. How many do you speak? You know, I met that friend because we hired her to babysit for us, and she was fairly newly arrived, and she said that she thought one of the only problems she saw that might make us not hire her is that her English isn't very good. And I thought that was a very bizarre thing to say, because we could communicate fine. It wasn't like there was a barrier that we wouldn't be able to communicate. And I was like, your English is like way better than my Mandarin, which was non-existent at that point. So you're meeting me more than halfway. Why would I be mad at you for that? But it is something that tons of Americans have. And that whole, if 2 people are speaking in a foreign language in your presence, that's your business. Like, why are you the center of the universe that you assume anyone near you must be talking about you, or that you have a right to know what other people are saying? You do not have an inherent right to eavesdrop. I know it's frustrating you that you can't eavesdrop on that conversation that you're not part of. Suck up and deal. People can talk whatever they want. So, okay, let's see. Let's see. Okay, people, someone else writing about whites asking, where are you from? She says she can pass for Indian, Spanish, Armenian, get the question all the time. She's Italian, don't believe me. One thing is, again, the reason why these questions of where are you from come up all the time is because the brain wants to categorize people. You know, that's why it's such a blurred out kind of thing. And I was like, what bin do I put that person in? What bin do I put that person in? And so that's why it's this very persistent itch in the brain that makes people be inappropriate and blurt things out like that. The other thing that is one of these things that from the white side feels like we're being complimentary when we totally aren't, is a baseline feeling that we got no culture. We don't have culture. We're just us. And everyone else, they get to have culture. And I'm so fascinated. They're so exotic. They have other languages. They have other foods. They have other holidays. That's so interesting. All I've got is just, you know, boring, nothing stuff. You know, it's this feeling that like the white person is the blank page and everything else is written on it, which for some people scares them because they think you're going to cover up their whole white page. But it's also, it's really, really insulting to assume that the white culture is just normal and is the baseline and everyone else is different from that. You know, it's kind of like, you know, when you're in the ocean, you don't really think much about the water. You don't recognize that water exists, but it's still water and it still exists. One way to help with that is to, you know, hang out with immigrants who want to learn more about American culture, because then you start to actually recognize that, oh wait, this is actually culture because they haven't experienced it, and therefore it is something. It isn't just air. The other is if you move to another part of the country, that helps because then you recognize subcultures. And moving out east let me get a much stronger grip on what Midwestern culture is, and being able to explain to people, especially around food. It mostly involves well, marshmallows and cream of mushroom soup, but we went to a family reunion in Indiana at one point, and there was a buffet there. And one thing is, I had not realized how much of middle and southern Indiana is really basically Kentucky. But anyway, And on the buffet, they had that Midwestern salad, you know, the one with the mini marshmallows and the mandarin oranges. And my husband was just like, oh my God, that's real? You've described this. I'm like, yeah, I described it because it's real. And he goes, yeah, I thought you were making that up, because he could not believe that anyone would put mandarin oranges and mini marshmallows and mayonnaise, Cool Whip, not regular mayonnaise, in something and stir it up and then have the nerve to refer to it as a salad. So every so often you get to recognize that generic is not actually generic. It is a culture. And it thinks that marshmallows are part of a salad. So, but yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend and have a good Juneteenth and have a good time acknowledging what an uphill slog it is for people for whom recognizing and appreciating racial differences is an uphill slog, and being supportive of them while still insisting that they still have to go uphill. Just because it's hard does not mean that you don't have to do it. It just means that, yes, you got my sympathy. No, stop using that word. Oh, one last really good story, because this is the other fun thing, is language is really hard to change. And it's so freaky when people will say things you agree with using terms you disagree with, or terms that are not okay. And my dad, died last August, and when he was in the hospital, just before, like one of my last conversations with him the night before he died, he was saying, I couldn't help noticing. And he was saying how he'd noticed how many of the direct care staff in the hospital were Black. And that, I mean, he didn't come in contact with anyone, he stayed home, but it was more contact with Black people than he'd had in ages. And so it was kind of tickling his brain more. So it was making him aware of it more. And he was just noticing it. And that was reminding him of all the stuff he sees on the news of Trump stuff being racist. And he was saying, I just can't understand why anyone would think less of someone based on race. You know, that he likes to think that he raised us all to just, that people are people. And the idea of thinking someone is inferior because of race is just something that does not make any sense to him at all. He cannot find a slot in his head where that fits at all, which is, wonderful. And so different from my mom, who will say that, but then totally not show it. Whereas my dad would really kind of, if something came on the news about racism, he was enraged and he was so pissed about it and so on. And so he was just commenting on it and just having this really wonderful, warm conversation with my 93-year-old dad about racism in America. But it starts with him saying he couldn't help noticing how many of the staff here are Negroes. Because during his formative linguistic period, that was the acceptable term. And I was like, sometimes you have to decide when is the appropriate time to teach someone what. If they've got a lot to learn about, you want to make sure that you don't give people the impression that how they're saying something matters more to you than what they're saying. And this is really important when you're listening to protesters. There's a lot out there of basically, we're not going to listen to you until you say it quietly, politely, calmly, and in unaccented Midwestern English. And being able to say, no, that does not matter nearly as much as what they are saying. You need to listen to what the person is saying and not get tangled up in whether they are saying it in precisely the format that makes you comfortable. Start with the fact that you being comfortable is not high on the list. So I decided in that moment that was not the time to give my dad a linguistic lesson, but just to agree with him about racism makes no sense at all. And I'm glad I didn't spend the day re-educating him since, 24 hours later he was dead, but it was a nice last conversation, or among the last conversations. So let's see if there's any other questions anywhere. Nope. Okay, so Have a great weekend. And I will, Wednesday, I'm not sure what topic I'm doing. I think I'm doing substance abuse, but I think it's still up in the air. So if you got any last votes, email me today before I set up my mind. So, and I'll talk to all of you later. Bye-bye.